She sat beside me every day. But never knew she owned my heart. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves, quiet, unassuming seconds that later change everything. For me, it was the day Ethan Hale sat beside me in our university lecture hall. My name is Laura Bennett, and I used to believe love happened like lightning, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. But with Ethan, it was different. It began in whispers, in small smiles, half-finished sentences, and the way his presence made even silence feel full. We were classmates in the Department of English Literature, and he was the kind of student professors adored, calm, thoughtful, always lost in his notes. I, on the other hand, lived for emotion. I wrote poetry in the margins of my notebooks and found metaphors in everything, even the way he pushed his hair back when he was nervous. We weren't friends, not really. We shared space, a desk, some awkward smiles, and once, a cup of coffee after an early lecture. It started with something simple. One morning, he forgot his pen. "Hey, Laura, could I borrow one?" he asked, his voice hesitant but warm. "Sure," I said, handing him my favorite black gel pen. "Just don't lose it." He smiled, not the careless kind, but the kind that lingers. I wouldn't dare. That tiny exchange became the start of something invisible yet magnetic. Days passed. Weeks melted into months. He always sat beside me. Always. Sometimes we talked about the novels we read, Bronte, Fitzgerald, Austen. Other times, we didn't talk at all. But his silence spoke to me more than most people's words ever could. One afternoon, during a group presentation, I saw a side of him I hadn't before. Confident. Passionate. His voice filled the room, and for a moment, I forgot we were just classmates. I clapped too loudly when he finished. He looked at me and smiled, and I knew, I was in trouble. I started noticing things I shouldn't. The way his sleeve brushed mine when we wrote notes. The way he leaned closer when I whispered something during lectures. The faint scent of his cologne, clean, like cedarwood and rain. One rainy evening, we were the last two left in the classroom. The power flickered, and the world outside turned gray. Ethan looked out the window, then at me. "Do you ever feel like we're living inside a book?" he asked softly. I laughed. "You mean all the drama, the unfinished endings?" He nodded. "No. The way some people are written into our stories, and we don't realize it until it's too late." Something in his tone made my heart skip. Before I could reply, the professor walked in, breaking the spell. But that sentence, written into our stories, followed me home that night, replaying over and over in my mind. Soon, the university festival arrived, full of lights, laughter, and moments that would blur into nostalgia someday. Our department was organizing a poetry reading, and I, foolishly brave, decided to read one of my own. When my name was called, my hands shook. But then I saw him in the audience, smiling, steady, reassuring. And somehow, that gave me courage. My poem was simple, about unspoken love, about people who sit beside each other every day, never realizing their hearts are already entwined. When I finished, the room clapped. But all I saw was Ethan, his eyes a little glassy, his smile softer than I'd ever seen. Afterward, he found me outside, under the fairy lights. "You wrote that about someone, didn't you?" he asked. "Maybe," I teased. "What makes you think that?" He hesitated, then said quietly, because every word felt like it already knew me. I froze, because he was right. It was about him. But before I could speak, a group of students called his name, and he left, leaving the air between us trembling with everything unsaid. The next few days were strange. He still sat beside me, but we barely talked. He'd look at me sometimes, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then one afternoon, he didn't come to class. Nor the next day. When I finally saw him again, he was sitting alone near the fountain outside, staring into the water. "Hey," I said, sitting beside him. "Where have you been?" He sighed. "Got some news. My dad's business isn't doing well." I might have to transfer, maybe even drop a semester. The words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell him not to. That I couldn't imagine that seat beside me empty. But I just said softly, "I'm sorry." He smiled weakly. "You know, I always thought leaving this place would be easy. But now it feels like I'd be leaving something I never got to understand." He didn't look at me when he said it. But he didn't have to. I knew. The next day, he didn't come again. So I did something I'd never done before. I wrote him a letter. Not long, not poetic. Just honest. "Ethan, I don't know if you'll read this, but there's something I can't keep silent anymore. You've been a part of my everyday, my calm, my chaos, my favorite silence. If you go, I'll miss you in ways I can't explain. Lara." I left it on his desk before class. When I came the next morning, it was gone. And for hours, I couldn't focus, my heart flipping between hope and dread. Then, after class, I found a note tucked inside my notebook. "Lara." I read it. "I don't know what the future holds, but if I stay, I'd want to spend every ordinary day sitting beside you. Because somehow, those became my favorite days. Ethan." I don't remember smiling that hard in my entire life. He didn't transfer. His dad's situation improved, and he stayed through graduation. We never had some grand confession or movie-like moment. It was slow, quiet, real. Sometimes, love doesn't begin with fireworks. Sometimes, it starts with two people sharing a pen, a desk, and a heartbeat that learns to match the other. Now, years later, whenever someone asks how we met, Ethan laughs and says, "She lent me a pen and stole my heart." And I always add, he sat beside me every day, and somehow, I never realized he already owned mine.